Good day, everyone. Today, we're exploring a simple yet powerful way of looking at right and wrong. It asks one essential question: how can we choose the action that creates the most good for everyone? This framework is called utilitarianism. First, what is utilitarianism? In simple terms, utilitarianism says that the foundation of all morals is utility or usefulness. An action is considered right if it leads to more happiness and wrong if it leads to opposite or unhappiness or pain. The goal of utilitarianism is simple: do the most good for the greatest number of people. Now that we understand the concept, let's look at the brilliant minds who started it all: Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill. First, we have Jeremy Bentham, the founder of the movement. He introduced the principle of utility. Bentham's idea was straightforward. Every action should be judged by whether it increases or decreases the happiness of a person involved. For him, it was all about the tendency of an act to create joy. For example, imagine a hospital manager deciding whether to buy a new luxury chair for their office or 5 new wheelchairs for the patients. Bentham would say that the right choice is the wheelchairs because they increase the happiness and mobility of many people rather than just one. Next is John Stuart Mill, who refined these ideas into what we call now the greatest happiness principle. Mill's famous rule is that actions are right if they promote happiness and wrong if they produce the reverse. For example, think of a nurse deciding how to spend her final 10 minutes of a shift. She could either organize her desk or spend those 10 minutes comforting a lonely patient. Mill would argue that comforting the patient is the right action because it directly promotes emotional well-being and reduces suffering, creating a higher proportion of happiness.
I will be discussing the key tenets or the main principles of utilitarianism. First is consequentialism. This means that the rightness or wrongness of an action depends on its outcome or result. In simple words, what matters most is the consequence of what we do. For example, if telling a lie as small can prevent someone from getting hurt, a utilitarian may say it is acceptable because the result leads to less harm. Next, the second one is hedonism. Hedonism in utilitarianism means that pleasure or happiness is the highest good, while pain is something we should avoid. The goal is to increase happiness and reduce suffering. For instance, helping a classmate understand a lesson can create happiness for both of you, so that action is considered good. Next, the third is universalism. Universalism means that we should consider the happiness of everyone, not just ourselves or a specific group. Each person's happiness is equally important. Like for example, when making a decision in a group project, you should think about what will benefit all members, not just your own preference.
There are two types of utilitarianism, and the first one is what we call the act utilitarianism, which states that a person's act is morally right if and only if it produces the best possible results in that specific situation. So in other words, the best action that we can take at all times is the one that maximizes well-being or good in the greatest number of individuals as possible. So here's an example of act utilitarianism in action. For example, imagine we were walking home with some food and encountered 5 homeless people needing food. But we only have enough food to really stop one of them from being hungry that night. So if we spread out the food equally, then no one would probably feel fully fed, but also no one would feel starved that night either. So what's the most moral thing to do? Because in act utilitarianism, It would probably suggest that spreading it out equally so everyone could get some is the most moral thing to do, because there's more utility or happiness if everyone is a little more satisfied than if just one person is feeling satisfied. But here's another example of act utilitarianism in action. Imagine a doctor has 5 patients that are dying and need a new organ. A homeless beggar with no family shows up in the hospital with all the functioning organs that the patients need. Should the doctor kill the beggar and use his organs to save the 5 patients? Because in act utilitarianism, it seems to suggest that he should, because there will be more utility in the world if those 5 patients with families are saved. But if you consider this very moral, then you're not alone, because in 1950, Richard Brand drew a contrast between act utilitarianism and rule utilitarianism to solve issues such as the scenario I just mentioned. Because rule utilitarianism says an action is right as it conforms to a rule that leads to the greatest good. So the difference between act utilitarianism is that act utilitarianism focuses on one's act only that could lead to the greatest utility, while rule utilitarianism focuses on following rules that are designed to lead to the greatest utility. Now, with rule utilitarianism, we can make a rule that states murdering innocent people, even for life-saving medical treatment, is wrong, because in the grand scheme of things, this can lead to more suffering and less utility if we can take the lives of innocent people for medical necessity. Rule utilitarianism can be divided into 2 different methods: the strong rule utilitarianism and the weak rule utilitarianism. The strong rule utilitarianism states that rules cannot be broken no matter what. An example of this in action is that we all should agree that lying to others is wrong, because telling the truth is a universal rule that leads to more utility. So if your friend was hiding in your house from a murderer and said the murderer knocked on your door wanting to know the location of your friend, rule utilitarianism states that you should reveal the location of your friend because lying is wrong. If that sounds strange and wrong to do, then you're not alone, because rule utilitarianism leads to seemingly immoral situations sometimes. So that's why weak rule utilitarianism was developed to serve as a solution to the issues of act and strong rule utilitarianism. One such type of weak rule utilitarianism is two-level utilitarianism, developed by philosopher R.M. Hare. Here we operate by 2 sets of rules. We have an intuitive moral set of ethics, or rule utilitarianism, like not driving through stop signs, but in some cases, where it is appropriate, we can engage in a critical level of moral reasoning. Act utilitarianism, like realizing that we may need to speed through a stop sign with no one around to get our wife, who is in labor, to a hospital. In other words, most of the time, we all live by a primary set of intuitive moral rules, but sometimes it is okay on occasion to break these rules and engage in a more critical level of reasoning or moral thinking. So there are other forms of
ethical implications. Utilitarianism is a way of making decisions based on what brings the greatest happiness for the greatest number of people. It helps us decide what is right or wrong by looking at the result of our actions. It highlights 3 key principles. Number 1, prioritizing happiness. It places a high value on happiness and well-being. It means that when making choices, we should focus on action that increase happiness and well-being. If something makes more people happy, it is considered a better choice. Number 2, promoting impartiality. It requires consideration of the interests of all affected parties. This means we should be fair and not favor one person or group over another. Everyone affected by a decision should be considered equally. Number 3, encouraging cost-benefit analysis. It involves weighing the benefit against the costs when making ethical choices. This means we think about good and bad effect of a decision. We compare the benefit and the harm before choosing the best action. In simple terms, utilitarianism helps people make decisions that are fair and aim for the greatest overall good for everyone involved.
We will discussing a criticism and challenges, while Utilitarianism offers a compelling approach to the ethics, including the three. First of one is the potential for injustice. Sometimes trying to make the majority happy can hurt a small group of people. So, even if the most people benefit, it might be unfair to others. For like example, a city builds a mall that helps most people shop and get jobs, but it forces a small community to recollect others. Second one is a difficulty of measuring happiness. It's hard to know how happy someone really feels. People feel happiness differently, so it's not easy to measure or compare. And the last one is overemphasis on a quantity. This means focusing on how many people are happy, not how deeply happy they are. For example, a small amount of happiness for many people be might chosen over a deep happiness for few people.
Frameworks means that a person should choose the action that produces the best result, focusing on the outcomes that brings most happiness or benefit to the greatest number of people. Although it can sometimes be unfair and it can be hard to predict. This means it is better to be an intelligent, thinking person who is aware of problem and seeks truth than being an ignorant or simple-minded and just be happy without understanding. A wise person sees both sides of an issue, while a fool only sees their own. It is better to be human being dissatisfied than a pig satisfied. Better to be Socrates dissatisfied than a fool satisfied. And if the fool or the pig is of different opinion, it is because they only know their own sides of the question. The other parties to the comparison knows both sides. I would prioritize the patient who are most likely to recover quickly and leave the bed available for others. The consensualism focus on efficiency, so these methods allows us to help more people in total. I would not remove anyone currently admitted, but for few patients, I choose the option that result in the highest number of survivals.